Hello, everyone. This is Professor Hall. I still have a little bit of a cold, so please forgive me on that. Today, we are talking about Zora Neale Hurston, and in particular, her story, The Gilded Six Bits. So, this is going to be two presentations, one on Zora Neale Hurston and her life, and then another one looking specifically at the story, which is one of my very favorites, and I'm really excited to share it with you. So, let's get started. Hurston's early life. All of her grandparents had been born into slavery, and later on, her mother was a school teacher and her father was a preacher and also a sharecropper. Not unusual for some ministers to have two jobs, but education and religion would be particularly important in her life, as we're seeing with a lot of the writers that we're looking at, right? Education for many African Americans at that point was kind of a way out of their circumstances and a way to better themselves. One of the things that also happened in Hurston's life that was particularly important is that when she was 3, the family moved to Eatonville, Florida. This was one of the only areas in the country to be officially incorporated and run as an all-black town. You can see in the picture here that I'll zoom in on. We have a number of leaders of the town here in front of the meeting house, all of whom are African American and quite distinguished in their suits and their hats and things like that. So this would have really influenced her life quite a bit and influenced her work as well. The idea that what she says later is that this is a place where African Americans could live as they pleased, independent from white society. So we're going to talk about the white gaze, what that means, and how the ideas and feelings about white supremacy at the time and how they were very prevalent. And she has many things that basically say how thankful she was for her upbringing in this town, where much of that she was kind of sheltered from. Her father was elected mayor there for a period of time, and so the family was quite prominent members of this community. Depiction of the humorous and exotic. This is something that a critic said about her work, that basically many people of the Lost Generation, Wallace Thurman in particular, we're gonna look at later, that they were trying to sort of show the seedier side of life, and Hurston started out with African American folklore. So some people didn't like her writing, and they said it was non-threatening and humorous, and it exoticized African Americans. But I disagree. I think what she did really was important, and the way that she depicted life, it's just like a different side of life. The Lost Generation, if you took that class with me, you know that many of the people of this time are writing about like alcoholism and toxic relationships and that kind of thing. But life is not always horrible and depressing, right? And that's kind of what she's trying to show. So she's highly educated in a private boarding school at first for high school. Later on, she went to Howard University, a traditional black college. And then she went on to Barnard College, which was basically the women's college of Columbia University. At that point, she was the only black student admitted into the college. So still fighting a lot of segregation, even up north, kind of de facto segregation, where they would not allow a lot of people in if they were people of color. So at Barnard, she was introduced to the field of anthropology, and she began conducting ethnographic research. So basically, it's the systematic study of individual cultures. And trying to do this from a different perspective. A lot of people also criticize her anthropologic work because she did not just observe things from a distance. We have a picture of her later in this presentation beating a drum along with a number of people that she was supposed to be studying. So she really got close to these people, and she kind of tried to experience what they were experiencing, which is something that we don't see until much later, that people don't want just, a basically many times a white view of somebody else's culture, but to really participate in what's going on instead of just noting it down and recording it as something exotic or different. So in that case, again, I think the critic at the top is wrong. But she traveled throughout the South, and later she went to the Caribbean, studying African American culture and collecting folklore. And eventually, this leads to the folklore collection, Mules and Men. A novelist of maturity who knows how to tell a story convincingly. That critic I actually do agree with. I think that what's interesting is she takes that work and then she moves up to Harlem in 1925. She becomes one of the central figures of the Harlem Renaissance. I love this picture of her just smiling in her hat here. She wins prizes for an opportunity. They had a literary magazine contest along with contemporaries Langston Hughes and Countee Cullen, who we have also studied for this course, and publishes some poetry and then moves on to essays, short stories, and later novels. So I think it's really interesting that she starts off as an anthropologist studying culture, moves on to folklore, gets really involved and interested in storytelling, particularly Afro-Caribbean storytelling and the cultural influences and how they came from Africa and the Caribbean into the South and then up to the North during that Great Migration time of the 1920s. And I think that you can see a lot of that in much of her work. She survived the Great Depression in part through patronage, so there were some wealthy individuals supporting her work who really believed in what she was doing. Many other people kind of faltered at that time, and that's one of the reasons that the Harlem Renaissance kind of fell apart. The Depression was hard on a lot of people, but particularly, racism rears its ugly head when economics are involved, even more, I think, prominently. I think it's kind of always there, but it's more prominent when we're in times of economic need. So basically, what happened is there's a lack of jobs, a lack of opportunities, and people are basically like, it's hard on white people, and let's give whatever jobs we can to them. That's sort of what happened. So it was very, very difficult time for many African Americans, but she was able to keep working and to keep writing. Then she continued to write and travel. She worked for the Federal Writers Project as a folklorist, gathering more information for historical and cultural collections. The Federal Writers Project is really interesting project done by the government. So it's kind of interesting, that her career sort of came full circle in a sense. Many people refer to her later career as throwing away genius. Her politics led to kind of fading popularity. She kept supporting people like Booker T. Washington, whose ideals were seen by that point as very old-fashioned. She criticized the New Deal in the 1940s and 50s, and people saw her as being uninterested in civil rights. But I think that that's also a misnomer because she worked as a journalist and she covered this landmark case that involved paramour rights. So basically, paramour rights were leftovers from when slavery was in the South. And basically, they stated that unofficially, that a white man could have relations with a black woman if he wanted, even if she said no. And so, in this case, a black woman was accused of the murder of a white man. The woman claimed that he had raped her, and he basically was like, it's my right to do so. The first trial had an all-white jury, and she was convicted. And then she was retried and found not guilty. And in part, what led to the retrial was Hurston's work as a journalist, so exposing this case, showing the pervasive sexual assault and corruption in the South, and showing how prominent politicians and other leaders were kind of supporting this type of horrible, essentially a continuation of slavery and human trafficking, if you want to kind of call it that. But it's really horrifying. And she helped to stop that. So by the time of her death, she was struggling financially. Her work kind of lapsed into obscurity. In the 1970s and 80s, prominent academics and authors such as Alice Walker were looking for to diversify literature. And so Alice Walker had this very famous essay about searching for Zora Neale Hurston. And because of that, her work came back into light and was kind of rediscovered and put into anthologies and studied in college and that kind of thing. And that's why you're reading it today. So thank you, Alice Walker. Okay, so that is a little bit about Zora Neale Hurston's life. When we pick back up in our next presentation, we're going to be doing a close reading of The Gilded Six Bits, one of her famous short stories. So stay tuned for that. Thanks.